Before layoffs begin, companies almost never start by firing people. That's the part most headlines miss. Long before pink slips go out, something quieter happens inside the business. It doesn't make the news. It doesn't show up in unemployment numbers. But for the people living through it, it's the first real sign that something has changed. Hours get cut. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to seem temporary. Just enough to be explained away. At first, it looks harmless. A shift disappears from the schedule. Overtime suddenly isn't approved anymore. Managers start saying things like, "This is just for now," or "We're being cautious this quarter." No one calls it a problem. No one calls it a crisis. But historically, this is almost always the first move. Companies cut hours before they cut jobs because it's the least visible way to reduce costs. There's no press release. No legal process. No public backlash. And most importantly, it doesn't show up as layoffs. On paper, everyone is still employed. And that's why it matters. When hours are reduced, labor costs fall immediately. Benefits often remain unchanged, but wages, the most flexible expense, drop without a single employee technically losing their job. For the company, it's a pressure valve. For workers, it's a silent pay cut. And it's happening more often than most people realize. In recent months, a growing number of workers have reported the same pattern. Schedules tightening. Shifts being consolidated. Full-time roles quietly drifting toward part-time hours. Not enough to trigger alarm bells, just enough to strain monthly budgets. If you only look at job numbers, none of this is obvious. But if you look at income, the story starts to change. A worker who goes from 40 hours a week to 32 hours hasn't lost their job. They're still counted as employed. Yet their paycheck drops by 20% overnight. Rent doesn't fall by 20%. Groceries don't get cheaper. Insurance premiums stay the same. From the outside, everything looks stable. From the inside, it feels very different. This is why hours are such a powerful early signal. They reflect how confident businesses really are, not what they say in earnings calls, but how they behave when demand becomes uncertain. When companies believe growth will continue, they protect hours. They add shifts. They authorize overtime. When confidence fades, hours are the first thing to go. It's a test. Executives watch closely to see what happens next. Does productivity hold? Do customers complain? Do workers quit? If cutting hours stabilizes margins without breaking operations, the pressure eases temporarily. But if conditions continue to worsen, the next step becomes easier. That's when layoffs begin. What makes this phase especially dangerous is how long it can last. Hour reductions don't happen overnight. They unfold slowly, often over several months. Each small cut feels manageable on its own. But over time, the cumulative effect is severe. A missed shift here. A shorter week there. An extra unpaid day off until things improve. For many workers, this creates a strange limbo. They're employed, but struggling. Working, but falling behind. Too busy to find a second job, but not earning enough to stay afloat. And because they're still technically employed, they often don't qualify for assistance. They don't show up in crisis statistics. Their stress stays invisible. This is one reason consumer behavior starts changing before recessions are officially declared. People don't wait for layoffs to cut spending. They respond to shrinking paychecks. Discretionary purchases slow first. Dining out. Travel. Non-essential retail. Then the cuts move closer to the basics. Subscriptions are canceled. Maintenance gets postponed. Credit cards start carrying balances that don't get paid off anymore. From the outside, these shifts look disconnected. From the inside, they're all tied to the same thing: less income flowing in every week. Companies understand this dynamic very well. They know reducing hours weakens demand without making headlines. And in many industries, it has become the standard first response to uncertainty. Retail, logistics, hospitality, manufacturing, anywhere labor is scheduled by the hour, this pattern repeats. What's different now is the scale. Hours aren't just being trimmed in struggling sectors. They're being adjusted across parts of the economy that are still described as strong. That contradiction is important, because it suggests that while employment levels look stable, confidence underneath them is not. And that gap between what the numbers say and what people experience is where most economic turning points begin. Layoffs don't start when businesses panic. They start when quieter measures fail. Hour cuts are that quiet measure. They are the system's early warning sign. What makes hour cuts especially revealing is where they show up first. They don't appear in press releases or quarterly earnings calls. They show up on schedules, in time clocks, in conversations that sound casual but feel unsettling. A supervisor mentions lighter demand. A manager talks about aligning staffing levels. Someone suggests taking an unpaid day off because it's slow anyway. None of this sounds like a crisis. That's the point. If layoffs are the headline event, hour cuts are the background signal, the one that tells you what companies really think about the months ahead. And right now, that signal is flashing more often. Across many industries, businesses are dealing with the same problem. Costs remain high, but demand is no longer accelerating the way it did before. Prices rose quickly. Consumers adjusted. Now spending is becoming more selective. That puts pressure on margins. When margins get tight, companies look for flexibility. And nothing is more flexible than labor hours. Unlike salaries, hours can be adjusted week to week. Unlike layoffs, they don't require severance or legal review. Unlike hiring freezes, they take effect immediately. From a management perspective, it's the cleanest lever to pull. But that lever has consequences. When hours fall, income falls unevenly. One worker might lose 5 hours a week. Another loses 10. Someone else keeps their schedule, for now. This unevenness creates confusion. People don't immediately panic, because not everyone is affected at the same time. That's how the pattern spreads quietly. In many cases, companies frame hour cuts as efficiency. We're just optimizing schedules. We're matching staffing to demand. The language sounds technical, rational, temporary. But historically, this phase rarely stays temporary. Businesses don't cut hours because they want to. They do it because they're uncertain. And uncertainty tends to persist longer than expected. Once hours are reduced, restoring them requires confidence that demand will rise and stay there. Without that confidence, companies hesitate. They keep schedules lean. They wait. Meanwhile, workers adapt. Some pick up second jobs. Others dip into savings. Many turn to credit to fill the gap. And because the reduction feels unofficial, people hesitate to make big decisions. They don't move. They don't quit. They don't retrain. They hope the hours come back. This waiting period is where financial stress quietly accumulates. A small weekly shortfall doesn't feel catastrophic at first. But over months, it erodes stability. Late fees appear. Emergency funds shrink. Small expenses start getting postponed. From the company's perspective, none of this is visible. From the economy's perspective, it's already happening. This is why hour cuts often precede changes in consumer data. Retail sales soften. Credit balances rise. Delinquencies tick up. Not because people lost jobs, but because their income slowly weakened. And when enough people experience this at once, the effects compound. Businesses notice foot traffic decline. Orders slow. Inventories build. That leads to more pressure. And the cycle reinforces itself. At that point, hour cuts stop being a precaution. They become a necessity. This is the transition many economies miss until it's too late. Analysts focus on employment levels and miss employment quality. They track job counts but ignore hours worked. They see stability where fragility is building. The difference matters. An economy with steady job numbers but falling hours is not strong. It's strained. It's holding together through adjustment, not growth. Historically, this phase can last longer than expected. Sometimes for quarters. Sometimes for years. During that time, layoffs remain low, giving the impression that risks are contained. But internally, businesses are learning something important. They're learning how much output they can get with fewer labor hours. That discovery changes behavior. Once companies adapt to leaner staffing, the threshold for layoffs drops. If demand falls further, cutting headcount feels less disruptive. The system has already been tested. This is why hour cuts are not just a response, they're preparation. They prepare operations. They prepare balance sheets. And, unintentionally, they prepare the path for layoffs if conditions worsen. Not every period of hour reduction leads to mass job losses. Sometimes demand recovers. Sometimes confidence returns. Hours are restored. The system stabilizes. But when hour cuts spread across industries at the same time, the risk profile changes. It suggests a shared hesitation. A collective pause. And that's what makes the current moment unusual. Hour reductions are appearing not just in traditionally volatile sectors, but in areas that were recently expanding. Logistics, warehousing, professional services, support roles. Places where demand was assumed to be resilient. That contradiction, stable jobs, shrinking hours, is not random. It's a signal of caution spreading faster than headlines suggest. And when caution becomes the dominant business strategy, the economy doesn't need a shock to slow down. It slows itself. This is the stage most people only recognize in hindsight. By the time layoffs begin, the warning signs have already been present for months, hidden in schedules, paychecks, and quiet adjustments no one thought to question. And that raises a more important question. If hours are being cut now, what happens if conditions don't improve? If hours continue to fall and demand doesn't return, the next phase becomes unavoidable. At that point, companies face a choice. They can keep trimming around the edges, or they can make permanent decisions. And once that line is crossed, the tone changes quickly. Layoffs don't arrive as a surprise to businesses. They arrive as a conclusion. By the time headcount is reduced, most internal adjustments have already been tested. Hours have been cut. Hiring has slowed. Projects have been delayed. Budgets have been tightened. What remains is what can no longer be avoided. This is why layoffs often appear to come out of nowhere to the public. From the outside, job numbers looked stable. From the inside, the system had been under pressure for months. What's different this time is how many people are already feeling the strain before that final step happens. Workers are juggling reduced schedules. Households are relying more on credit to smooth gaps in income. Savings that were built during better periods are being drawn down quietly. None of this triggers headlines on its own. But together, it changes behavior. People become cautious. Spending slows. Commitments feel heavier. Risk tolerance drops. These shifts don't require panic. They happen naturally when income becomes less predictable. And unpredictability is what hour cuts introduce. When paychecks fluctuate week to week, planning becomes difficult. Even small expenses feel uncertain. That uncertainty spreads through the economy faster than fear ever could. Businesses feel it in weaker demand. Consumers feel it in tighter budgets. And policymakers often don't see it at all because it doesn't show up clearly in traditional indicators. This is why focusing only on layoffs misses the point. By the time layoffs dominate the conversation, the economic adjustment is already well underway. The real story unfolds earlier, in smaller changes that feel personal but go unmeasured. Hour cuts are one of those changes. They don't mean a downturn is guaranteed. They don't predict timing. They don't tell us how severe the outcome will be. What they do tell us is that confidence is fragile. And when confidence becomes fragile across many businesses at once, the margin for error shrinks. A small shock that would have been absorbed in stronger conditions now carries more weight. A slowdown in one sector spills into another. A temporary issue lingers longer than expected. This is how slowdowns form without a single dramatic trigger. They're built from caution, layered on top of caution. Understanding this doesn't require pessimism. It requires attention. It means watching the parts of the economy that adjust first, not the ones that make headlines last. It means listening to what businesses do, not just what they say. And it means recognizing that stability on paper can coexist with strain in reality. For individuals, this period calls for awareness, not panic. Reduced hours don't demand drastic action overnight. But they do signal the importance of flexibility in spending, in planning, and in expectations. For businesses, they reflect a collective pause. A moment where decisions are deferred, risks are reassessed, and the future feels less certain than it did before. And for the economy as a whole, they represent a threshold. Not a collapse. Not a guarantee of recession. But a shift from confidence to caution. That shift is easy to miss if you're only looking at the surface. This channel exists to look beneath it. If you want to understand the early signals that shape what comes next, before they turn into headlines, consider subscribing. And if this pattern sounds familiar, share your experience in the comments. Are hours being cut where you work? Have schedules changed quietly over the past few months? Sometimes the most important economic signals aren't found in reports or charts. They're found in the changes people live through every week. And those are the signals worth paying attention to,